China's policy goals, especially those that aim to boost domestic spending and keep rising debt under control, are being seriously hampered by the country's aging population. A record low birth rate and a lot of deaths from COVID-19 have caused the country's population to drop for the second year in a row, which makes people even more worried about its demographic future. This change in the population could hurt China's long-term growth chances by reducing the number of people working and making a lot of its population older. Many of these people are past the age when they can afford to spend the most, which makes the structural imbalances that Chinese officials are already having trouble with even worse. China already has some of the lowest family consumption as a share of its economic output. This trend makes it even harder for the government to move the economy toward one that is driven by consumption. Along with a smaller workforce, the growing number of seniors will put a lot of stress on provincial governments that are already having a hard time paying their debts. These local governments are in charge of pensions and care for the old, which are both getting more expensive as the population ages. Decades of growth driven by credit and investments have caused a lot of debt to build up at the local level. This makes it harder for governments to handle the rising costs of an aging population. In short, China's declining population is a major threat to the country's economic and social security. It makes it harder to achieve long-term growth and handle debt, and it also puts a lot of pressure on the social safety net. Beijing will have to deal with these population and economic problems for the next 10 years. China is facing a huge problem with its aging population and impending retirement disaster. Over the next 10 years, about 300 million people aged 50 to 60 will stop working, which is almost the entire population of the United States. The country's pension system is already under a lot of stress, and the Chinese Academy of Sciences says it will run out of money by 2035. This change in the population comes at a bad time. Reports from China's Finance Office show that almost a third of the country's provinces already have pension budget deficits. The problem is made worse by the way China's workers are organized. The country has one of the lowest retirement ages in the world: 60 for men, 55 for white-collar women, and 50 for factory women. And it doesn't take in many foreign workers, mostly highly skilled ones. This early retirement age, along with the large number of people who are leaving the job, makes the pension burden too high to handle. The system is already under a lot of stress because a record 28 million people are planning to retire this year alone. In some Western countries, retirement ages are less rigid, so older workers may stay on the job for longer. However, in China, especially in state-owned businesses, workers are expected to leave at a certain age. Even private companies don't keep older workers very often, which makes things even more rigid. This sudden drop in the number of older workers leaving the job market will make the difference between those who pay into the pension system and those who receive benefits even bigger. This could put a lot of stress on the economy if changes aren't made soon. These changes will not only make China's pension system less stable, but they will also make it harder for people to find work, which could slow down economic growth and put more pressure on people who are working age. To escape a financial and social crisis in the next 10 years, policy changes may need to be made right away. These could include raising the retirement age, reforming pensions, and maybe even loosening immigration rules. The situation in China is very dangerous, and it looks like not many people can do anything to stop it. There are protests happening all over the country because people are getting more worried about an older population. As usual, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, seems to be reacting with needless force, which is how they usually do things. Some people say that China's elderly population could be the country's biggest problem ever, and even its very survival. The World Health Organization says that by 2040, which isn't that far away, 42 million people in China will be over 60 years old. That's almost a third of the whole population. Just to give you an idea, that's more people than live in the whole country of the United States. Imagine a country the size of the US that was made up of only older people. For the CCP, that's a pretty scary thought. It's not that old people aren't important, it's just that the difference between people of working age and retirees is making things very hard for the government and the business. Now we have some big questions. Where did China come from? Is it possible to fix it? What does this mean for China's future and the future of the rest of the world, since China makes so many things? Today, let's dive in and answer these questions. We need to go back in time to really understand how China's rapidly aging population got this way. The problem has its roots in the time of Mao Zedong. There were way too many people in China in the spring of 1959, and there wasn't nearly enough food for them all. Even though other things played a role, the main point is that this caused a terrible famine in which more than 30 million people sadly died of hunger. Going back to 1979, China was facing the same problem once more. The trouble this time was that the country's resources could not handle the growing number of people. There was a big fear of another famine because the population was getting close to 1 billion. The CCP knew they had to move quickly. It wasn't possible to do the same thing again. This problem was first noticed in Beijing in 1970 and was tried to be fixed with a program called Long Late Few. The plan was easy. Tell women to wait to get married so they can have more time with their kids and have fewer babies overall. The birth rate in China fell from 5.7 in 1969 to 2.7 by 1978, showing that it worked for a while. It wasn't enough, though. The notorious one-child policy was put in place by Deng Xiaoping when China needed something more extreme. This law said that people could only have one child. It worked best in cities where it was enforced. Families broke up into smaller nuclear groups, and things looked like they were under control for a while. Making birth control easy to get and giving nice things to people who followed the one-child policy were two things that the government did. If you did what they said, you might get your child free or cheap college, loans with no interest, and better job access. The carrot part of the plan was that. At first, the government used these nice incentives, but finally, they switched to harsher measures, or the stick. This meant they started to abuse people by doing things like forcing women to have abortions and get sterilized. That's pretty intense, right? But let's not talk about human rights right now. It would take all day. Let's not change the facts. The strict rules in China seemed to work for a while. The average number of babies per woman fell to 1.67 in 2015, a big drop from in the past. In that sense, the strategy was a success. But no one seemed to think about what would happen in the long run. Fewer young people and a lot more older people. After many years, China now has a lot more older people than younger people. That doesn't even touch on the fact that there are about 35 million more guys than women in China, which is another unintended result. So, China may have gotten rid of the problem of too many people for a while, but now they have a new one. It's too late for the government to change its mind about the strategy now that it knows this. The birth rate isn't going up fast enough to fix the damage that has already been done. There are now a lot of old people in China, which has caused a lot of new problems that can't be fixed quickly. Let's look at how China's large number of old people is affecting the country and the world. We're going to use this phrase a lot, so let's quickly go over what it means. An older population. It basically happens when the birth rate in a country keeps going down. Don't get me wrong. Living a long time is a gift, and getting older is a beautiful part of life. There is a problem when more people are getting old and fewer young people are being born to replace them. Take a look at a plant as an example. If you keep making things but don't get any new raw materials, you'll run out of things to make. This may be too simple, but that's pretty much what's going on in China right now, and it's happening quickly. Let's get down to the specifics of this change in the population. China has what is known as the 421 problem because of the one-child policy, which has been in place for almost 40 years. It sounds like a football shape, but trust me, it's not nearly as exciting. It's called the 421 problem because many families only have one child and expect them to take care of 2 parents and 4 grandparents. That's too much for one person to handle. This is not only hard on the younger generation, but it also makes things hard for the older generation. We will soon talk about culture, but for now, let's talk about money. In China, the number of working-age people is going down, while the number of elderly people is going up. Just like in the factory case, inequality like this is very bad. China no longer has a healthy, balanced population pyramid. Instead, it has something very scary. If you didn't feel your heart pounding while looking at this population graph, you might not understand how bad this is. There are fewer people working, so there are fewer people to care for an increasing number of old people. This is like setting off an economic and social time bomb. China's population is getting older, which is having effects on many areas, from healthcare to the job market. The shrinking workforce is one of the most important effects. As more people reach retirement age, fewer people of working age are available, which could cause labor shortages in certain businesses. The manufacturing industry in China has been the country's economy for a long time, so this is a big deal. China became the world's biggest manufacturer mainly because it has a huge pool of cheap workers and can make a lot of things at once. The UN says that China's industrial output makes up almost 29% of all manufacturing output in the world. In 2019, 30% of China's GDP came from this sector alone. That shows how important manufacturing is to China's character, both at home and around the world. But if China's most valuable asset, its workers, keeps going down, it could lose its manufacturing lead to countries like India, which is already closing in on it. As I said before, the World Health Organization thinks that by 2040, 1/3 of China's people will be over 60 years old. China isn't likely to stay the leader in industry for long since there aren't as many young people looking for work. There are already signs of trouble in the numbers. 815 million people worked in China in 2016. That number dropped to 784 million by 2020, and it dropped even more to 779 million by 2023. In 2016, 77.8% of people were working. Now, only 75.5% are working, and this number is likely to keep going down. The manufacturing sector in China will shrink as the workforce does. This could cause companies to move output to other countries with younger, more plentiful labor forces, which could cost the economy billions of dollars. Foreign investments are a big part of China's economic growth, and this will hurt them directly. Less production means fewer workers, which is bad for a country that has counted on being the world's factory. More businesses are leaving China, which is a very bad sign for the economy of the country. This isn't just a possible worry, it's happening right now. Intel, Microsoft, Nike, Amazon, and Dell are just a few of the big companies that have said they want to move some of their production to other countries. Many US companies are moving away from Chinese manufacturing, which is part of a larger trend. This shows that the way things are made around the world is changing. Why are these businesses leaving China, which could cost the country billions of dollars? One big reason is that the cost of making things is going up. China's population is getting older, so there are fewer workers. To get young workers, companies have to raise pay. Production costs naturally go up when there aren't enough workers or rates go up. This makes it harder for China to stay competitive compared to countries like India and Vietnam, which have younger workers and lower production costs. In a strange way, China's aging population is making these wage costs go up. There are also protests among young people and other social problems that keep them from working. This makes it even harder for businesses to find the workers they need. There is a video with more information on this, but the main point is that higher wages mean higher prices of production, which makes China less competitive on the world market. Costs are going up, so more businesses are leaving China. This makes unemployment go up, which puts even more pressure on the economy. In order to talk about the decline brought on by the aging problem, we must also talk about how it has affected economic growth. If the aging coefficient, the percentage of older people in the population, goes up by 1%, China's economic growth could slow down by 0.38%. It might not seem like much at first, but this drop adds up over time. China's economic future looks bleak, and its people could have a hard time if it doesn't come up with plans to deal with its old population soon. China needs to get out of this mess quickly. A growing number of older people in China is hurting the economy, and there's also a growing cost of living that's linked to something called the dependency ratio. The dependency ratio counts the number of people, including children and the old, who depend on people of working age for help. This number is going up quickly in China. You can expect it to hit almost 52% by the middle of the century. After that, things will only speed up. In real life, what does this mean? In that case, 52% means that for every 100 people of working age, there will be 52 people who count on them. So, for every 2 adults who work, there's almost someone who counts on them, like a child or an older person. A big difference like this is very hard on state resources, like social services and healthcare, as well as on family budgets. There is a big problem here because thanks to modern medicine, people are living longer but not having as many kids. This makes the dependency ratio even worse, which turns the benefit of living longer into a bigger money problem. Let's talk about China's pension system, which is already under a lot of stress because of the growing number of older people. As a matter of fact, the pension scheme is not very good. A basic pension system run by the government, voluntary pension plans from companies, and private voluntary pension schemes make up the 3 parts. The problem is that neither the public nor the private pension programs are fully developed yet, and not many people use them. The state pension system, which is already having a hard time with money, has to take on most of the extra work. China's pension fund is almost empty because more retirees are taking money out of their accounts and fewer young workers are putting money into it. It wasn't designed to handle the huge number of retirees that are coming, and if big changes aren't made, it could soon break down from the stress. China is already having a hard time with its economy because its population is getting older. This makes things even worse. In China, the pension system is already very weak, and the payments are so low that they can't even cover the costs of basic living. Without major changes, the system might not be able to keep going, which could mean that benefits are cut or taxes go up for people who are working. It looks like the country is stuck between a rock and a hard place because this would hurt the business even more. Not only are pensions under pressure, but China's healthcare and social services are also being strained by the country's growing number of seniors. Costs for healthcare are likely to go through the roof as more people reach old age. Costs for healthcare could go up by more than 50% by 2050, according to some figures. This is a huge financial burden. Older adults are much more likely to have chronic illnesses. In China, 80% of the elderly already have at least one chronic sickness. That's over 200 million people. This means that a huge number of them need medical care. When you think about the fact that China has the most people with dementia in the world, things look even worse. Caring for people with dementia can be very expensive because they need long-term, specialized care. China will have to spend a lot of money on healthcare as these numbers keep going up, especially for managing end-of-life care and long-term illnesses. The truth is that China's pension and healthcare systems aren't financially ready to deal with this growing problem. The country needs a plan to deal with the rising costs of healthcare for the old, but their budget isn't deep enough to cover these huge costs right now. China is under a lot of stress because of the elderly problem, and things are only going to get worse if nothing is done quickly. In rural China, where there aren't as many hospitals, there are only about 1.5 beds for every 1,000 people who need to be hospitalized. This is an even worse condition. What does that mean for the elderly people who live in rural places? If government funding can't even fix the problems with healthcare in cities, the answer is sad. To say it is disastrous would be an insult. But healthcare isn't the only thing that needs our attention. China has to rethink how it does many things, like shopping, real estate, and technology, because its population is getting older. People over 65 tend to spend more on living, healthcare, and services, and less on consumer goods. This change in spending can have a big effect on market demand, which means that these industries are likely to go through big changes. Soon, plans must be made for how to handle this change. Otherwise, the economy will take another hit. Another problem is that older people tend to eat and drink less. China will have to change its economy and monetary policies as its people get older, even if it means moving more slowly in some areas. Don't think that China's future, which will be based on innovation, won't be harmed. A workforce that is getting older could make it harder for the country to come up with new ideas and increase output. Younger workers are often better at using new technologies and are more likely to start their own businesses, which boosts entrepreneurship. Think about how often your parents ask you to help them with simple tech issues, like turning their router back on. Think about what happens to the economy when most of the workers are older. New ideas aren't brought forward as quickly. To put it simply, the powerful Dragon of the East is having a rough time. To deal with the problems that come with an aging population, we will need to make big changes to the way policies are made. Put more money into social and health services, and move toward an economy that is built on knowledge and technology. But we all know that these answers are not easy to follow through on. We've mostly talked about how this problem affects China, but it's clear that everyone will be affected. Now let's switch topics and look more closely at how this problem of older people is affecting Chinese families. Take a look at a normal Chinese home to begin. As we've already talked about, the 421 model makes it clear that expecting a single child to support all 6 parents and grandparents is not possible, especially when times are tough. Many older people have to work longer and harder just to support their children and grandkids because of this stress. The balance has changed so much because of the rising cost of living that parents and grandparents often help their grown children stay alive. A lot of young parents depend on their senior parents for money to make ends meet. Take Grandma Fang as an example. The BBC talked to her. She lives in an old care home and pays for her own long-term care instead of relying on her son. She said, "I have a more open mind. There aren't many people our age who think like us, and we rather enjoy life. Many older people are giving up things to help their families, and this shows it." But it's not just about money, they also have a big moral duty to fulfill. Especially in homes where both parents work, grandparents often step in to help with childcare. That means that grandmothers often have to take care of their grandchildren, send them to school, and even drive them around. It may be hard to fully understand this if you're not from China, but in that country, the idea of filial piety, respecting and caring for your elders, is deeply embedded. This assumption puts a lot of stress on older generations, who already have to take care of their own needs and support their families. These problems are linked, which shows how much the age crisis is changing the way families in China work. In Chinese society, filial piety means honoring and taking care of your parents. This means that older people often help their adult children, expecting their children to take care of their parents as they get older. People often ask their grandparents to help raise their grandkids because family ties are so strong. People think that this is a good way for older people to stay in touch with their families and help out. But because wages are so low and a lot of problems are coming up, this duty is becoming too heavy for many seniors. As China's population ages, its social safety nets, such as pensions and aged care services, are not strong enough to keep people alive. This means that older people have to make hard decisions. The basic state income was only $28 a month in 2022, while the national average for pensions from public jobs was only $500 a month. Obviously, that's not enough to live on, but a lot of older people feel like they have to work well into their golden years or depend on their children, who then depend on them for help. Take the case of an elderly man who spoke to Al Jazeera. He had to go back to work because his living costs were higher than his income. Right now, he has 2 jobs. He's an accountant during the day and a hotel security guard at night. Think about being in your 70s and having to work that hard just to stay alive and help your family pay the bills. All of this puts a lot of stress on China's older people. Being a caregiver for young children can be hard on your body, especially if you are older. There's also the mental stress of being responsible for the family's well-being, which can make stress and anxiety worse. This is a tough situation that shows how complicated it is to age in a society where societal norms and financial facts are closely linked. Feeling responsible for the well-being of people from different groups can be very hard on older adults. Many seniors don't get to enjoy their golden years because they are too busy dealing with stress and health problems and taking care of their kids and grandkids. It is a lot to handle, especially when you have a long-term illness. Not only that, but seniors who work longer just to help out can make any health problems worse and lower their quality of life. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't fully understand these problems, which makes them angry and leads to protests as people demand better living conditions and justice. Does the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, hear? That's the big question. It doesn't look like it from what we've seen. The CCP says it is a government for the people, but it needs to really back that up by making policy changes that matter. It is the job of the government to look out for its people. When there are riots and unrest, the CCP might be in a tough spot if things keep going the way they are. The problem with the elderly not only threatens social stability, but also makes it harder for the party to hold on to power. You'd think they'd be working hard to find ways to keep their political standing. Not only does the aging population affect the workforce, but it also causes problems for China's defense. The military might not be able to keep its strength up if there aren't as many young, fit people to recruit. With all the tensions in the world right now, like those caused by the situation in Ukraine, it's not a good time for China to possibly be short on military people. There are big effects on national security, and this shows how connected these problems are to the future of the country. When things get tough, China might have to rely on an old military, which could be a problem if it gets into a fight with one of its many enemies. China's role on the world stage, its power depends on how strong its economy is, adds to the mix. What will China really have left if its industries fall apart and its economy gets worse? The CCP does not want to go from being ahead of the pack to having to play catch-up, which is a situation that could happen. This is not a problem for the future. It's an urgent matter that needs to be dealt with right away. We need solutions right away, especially since the aging problem is getting worse and is changing China's political, social, and economic landscapes. The gap between the sexes will get bigger if the current steps don't work. It's clear that the CCP will need to think about some major changes soon in order to face these problems head-on. Fresh thoughts and good plans have never been more important than now because time is running out.